The morning Tanner Briggs nearly drowned his daughter's rubber duck in a coffee mug was the same morning everything changed. He hadn't slept. That much was obvious from the way he stood at the kitchen counter, still in his work boots at 6 a.m., pouring coffee into a mug that already had a rubber duck in it. Peanut's rubber duck, the yellow one with the chipped beak she'd named Gerald. He didn't notice until the coffee reached Gerald's neck, and even then, he just stared at it for a second before setting the pot down and fishing the duck out with 2 fingers. He set Gerald on the dish rack to dry. Then he drank the coffee anyway. Tanner was 38 years old, and he ran a small electrical contracting crew out of Beaufort, South Carolina. 4 guys, a van, and enough outstanding invoices to give him a headache every Sunday night. He'd been doing it for 11 years, first as a journeyman, then licensed, then running his own jobs when his daughter Piper was still small enough to fit in a baby seat in the cab of his truck. Now she was 7 and she fit in the passenger seat like she owned it, feet on the dash and a cereal bar in her hand, singing along to songs Tanner only half recognized. He did it all alone, had been doing it alone for 4 years, since Piper's mother packed a bag one afternoon and didn't come back. Not in any dramatic way, no screaming, no ultimatum. She'd just sort of receded, the way water pulls back from shore before something big comes. And then she was gone, and Tanner had a 3-year-old who needed her hair brushed and her lunch made and someone to sit outside the bathroom door when she was afraid of the dark, and he learned to do all of those things the same way he learned electrical work, slowly, and by making mistakes, and by never letting anyone see the mistakes. He wasn't bitter about it anymore. That had burned off somewhere around year 2. What he had instead was a kind of low-grade tiredness that he carried around like a tool belt, always there, adjusted for, part of the job. That Tuesday morning in October, Piper ate her cereal at the kitchen table and told him she needed a costume for the school harvest festival. "What kind of costume?" he asked. "A butterfly." "We have until when?" "Friday." He looked at her. She looked back at him with the particular calm of a child who has never once doubted that her father would figure it out. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she agreed and went back to her cereal. The Whitmore Hotel had been under renovation for 2 years. Tanner's crew had picked up the electrical contract in the spring, rewiring 3 floors of a historic property that the new ownership was trying to restore without gutting the bones of the building. It was painstaking work. Old wiring, new code requirements, walls that couldn't be touched because of preservation rules. His foreman, Dale, called it playing operation on a building that bites back. Tanner had stopped correcting him. The new owner was a company called Hargrove and Slate, a development firm out of Charlotte. Tanner had dealt with their project manager in the early months, a guy named Phil who sent a lot of emails and showed up to site visits in shoes that were wrong for the building. Then Phil got pulled to another project in October, and a week into the month, a woman walked onto the 3rd floor and introduced herself. "I'm Arden Calloway," she said. "I'll be taking over as project lead." She was holding a hard hat under one arm and a tablet in the other, and she was wearing flat boots that were actually appropriate for a construction site, which Tanner noticed because Phil's shoes had genuinely bothered him. She had dark hair pulled back, and she looked at the exposed ceiling joists with the kind of focused attention that meant she actually knew what she was looking at. Tanner wiped his hand on his jeans and shook hers. "Tanner Briggs, electrical." "I know," she said. "I read your contract on the drive down." "You're 2 weeks behind on the 3rd floor. We're 3 days behind," he said. "Not 2 weeks." She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not offended, more like recalibrating. "The timeline in the file says." The timeline in the file was built before we opened up the west wall and found knob and tube wiring behind the plaster. Everything had to be assessed before we could proceed. "I sent a written update to Phil on September 22nd. She looked down at her tablet, scrolled. "Found it. Read it." 3 days behind," she said. 3 days behind. She nodded slowly. "All right, walk me through where you are." He did. He showed her the panel upgrades on the east end, the recessed lighting rough-in what was going to be the mezzanine suite, the conduit runs that needed to go through a wall they weren't allowed to cut into from the exterior. She asked questions that were specific and reasonable. She didn't pretend to know things she didn't know, and she didn't apologize for not knowing them either. She just asked and listened and wrote notes on her tablet. By the time they'd done a full walkthrough, it was past noon. "I have a meeting at 1, she said, "but I want to revisit the conduit question on the west stairwell. Are you here tomorrow morning?" 7 a.m. he said. 7, she agreed. She left. Dale appeared at Tanner's shoulder. New project leads a lot better than Phil, Dale said. Don't make it weird, Dale. I'm just saying. She actually looked at the wiring. Phil looked at the wiring. Phil looked at the wiring like it had personally offended him. Tanner didn't respond to that because Dale wasn't wrong. He found the butterfly costume at a craft store on Wednesday evening, which was a miracle of timing, because Piper had changed her mind twice, first to a fox and then back to a butterfly but a purple one, and the craft store had purple fabric wings for $4 on a clearance rack near the Halloween section. He bought 2 sets in case he messed up the first one, then stood in the checkout line with wings under one arm and Piper on his hip, her cheek pressed against his shoulder, half asleep because it was 7:30 and she'd had soccer practice. The woman behind him in line said, "That is very sweet." He turned around. She smiled, an older woman, maybe 60, with a cart full of yarn. "Daddy on costume duty," she said warmly. "Every year," he said. Piper made a small sleepy noise against his shoulder. He adjusted his arm to hold her better. "She's lucky to have you," the woman said. Tanner looked at his daughter. At her eyelashes against her cheek and the mud still on her shin from soccer and the tiny fist curled in the fabric of his jacket. "I'm the lucky one," he said, and he meant it completely. Arden Calloway had not expected South Carolina. She'd been based in Charlotte for 6 years, moving from project to project the way her job required. Always a new city, a new building, a new set of contractors who either resented the oversight or tried to charm their way through it. She'd learned early to read people fast. It was a survival skill in her line of work. Tanner Briggs she'd read as competent and a little guarded, which was fine. She didn't need him to like her. She needed the 3rd floor roughed in by mid-November. What she hadn't expected was that he would be right about the timeline, and that he would say so plainly without any of the defensiveness or performance she was used to. Most contractors, when challenged on a delay, either got their backs up or over-apologized. He'd just corrected her and backed it up with documentation. She respected that. She filed it away. What she also hadn't expected was the Thursday afternoon 3 weeks into the project when she arrived at the site to find Tanner's crew gone at 3:30, which was early, and Tanner himself on the 2nd floor landing, on the phone, and she would have thought nothing of it except that she heard him say, "What do you mean she fell? How bad?" in the kind of voice that dropped the volume and went still. She stayed near the stairwell, not eavesdropping exactly. There was nowhere else to go, and heard, Okay, I'm leaving right now. Tell her I'm coming." He came around the corner and almost walked into her. "Sorry," he said immediately. "My daughter, I have to go. I'm sorry. Dale can walk you through the panel work if you need." "Go," she said. "Is she okay?" He was already moving. "She fell at recess. They think it might be her wrist. I need to get there." "Go," Arden said again. "We'll handle it." "Go." He went. She stood on the 2nd floor landing for a moment after she heard the stairwell door close below, and then she went and found Dale and asked him about the panel work. But she thought about it later, the way his voice had changed on that phone call. The way he'd said, "Tell her I'm coming," like it was the most important thing he would say all day, which she supposed it was. Piper's wrist was not broken. It was sprained, and she was furious about it in the particular way of 7-year-olds. Not because it hurt, but because the doctor had said no soccer for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, she told Tanner in the car on the way home, holding her wrapped wrist against her chest with tremendous dignity. "I know, Peanut. That's the Hartwell game. We'll figure out the Hartwell game." "I was going to score. I know you were." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I still be a butterfly?" "You can absolutely still be a butterfly." She seemed to find this acceptable. She leaned her head against the window and watched the streetlights go by. At home he made grilled cheese and tomato soup, which was the only meal Piper had ever declared perfect, and while she ate, he sat across from her and thought about the 17 things he needed to do before 7 a.m., and decided none of them mattered right now. "Tell me something good," he said. It was something they had been doing since she was 4, when the pediatrician had told him that routines helped kids feel secure, and he'd fumbled through building one from scratch. "Tell me something good at dinner. A book before bed, the same song always when the lights went out." Piper considered it seriously. "Gerald the duck is fully dry," she said. Tanner laughed. It came out sudden and real, and Piper grinned at him, that gap-toothed grin she'd had since losing her front tooth in August. "That is something good," he agreed. Arden asked about his daughter the next morning, which surprised him. "The wrist," she said when he came onto the floor. "How is she?" He looked at her. "Sprained, she's okay. Good." She didn't linger on it, just nodded and pulled up her tablet. "I want to show you something on the conduit run." He didn't think about it until later. It was a small thing, asking. People asked. But there was something in the way she'd said it, not as small talk but as a real question, that stayed with him the way small things sometimes did. The weeks moved the way construction weeks did, with problems and solutions and new problems that were the solution's fault. The window framing on the fourth floor turned out to be original 1920s wood that had to be treated before any new wiring could go near it. A permit issue stalled the lobby work for 4 days. Tanner's second electrician, a guy named Paul, threw out his back and was out for a week, which pushed everything by 3 days and brought them right back to the same conversation about the timeline. He and Arden had it in the corridor outside what would eventually be the hotel bar, standing next to a stack of copper conduit. 3 more days, he said. "Can you get it to 2? I can get it to 2 if Paul's back by Monday. What if he's not? Then it's 3. She looked at the conduit, looked at him. What would you need to make it 2 regardless? He thought about it honestly. Another set of hands for the rough in on 2. Someone who knows what they're doing. She nodded, made a note. "I'll see what I can do. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said. Not sharp, just matter of fact. "But if I can, I will. It's my project." He found her later, having come to understand that this was how she worked. Not loudly, not with performance, but just by doing the thing she said she'd do. She'd said she'd send an updated permit package to the city and it arrived the next morning. She'd said she'd get the historic preservation rep on site to sign off on the wall, and the rep showed up Thursday at 9. She said, and she did. He wasn't sure when he'd started noticing her specifically. Not just her competence, but her. The way she pressed 2 fingers to her temple when she was thinking through a problem. The way she laughed when Dale made a bad pun, short and a little surprised, like she'd been caught off guard. The way she never talked down to any of his crew, ever, which was rarer than it should have been. He noticed, and then he reminded himself that she was the project lead, that this was a professional relationship, that he was a 38-year-old man with a 7-year-old and a company with 4 guys and a van and outstanding invoices, and that women like Arden Calloway, educated, accomplished, clearly going somewhere, didn't factor in men like him when they thought about their lives. He was good at compartmentalizing. He'd had to learn. The Whitmore held a stakeholder event in mid-November, a preview of the restored ballroom and lobby for investors and press, the kind of event Tanner's crew was absolutely not invited to, nor should be. He knew it was happening because Arden had mentioned the date 3 times in the context of finished deadlines, and because Dale had made a joke about wearing his good flannel. Tanner was on site that Saturday anyway. Not for the event. They'd wrapped the 3rd floor work on Friday, and he'd come back to do a solo walkthrough and make sure every outlet cover was seated and every fixture was secure before the space got turned over. It was the kind of thing he did on every job quietly when everyone else was gone. He was coming down the back stairwell, the one that led out near the loading dock, when the door to the alley opened from the outside and Arden walked in. She was in a dark green dress. She had her heels in one hand. She stopped when she saw him. He stopped when he saw her. "The event's still going," she said, not explaining further. "I know, I was doing a walkthrough." He gestured vaguely at the stairwell behind him. "I'm just heading out." She nodded. She looked tired in a way she never did during work hours. Not a bad tired, just the kind that came from holding it together in public for too long. "You doing the walkthrough yourself?" she asked. "Habit. You check every job like that. Everyone." She looked at him for a second. Something in her expression shifted, that same recalibration he'd seen on the first day, but different now. "I brought wine from the event," she said, and held up a glass she had in her other hand, the one not holding the shoes. It was about a third full. "There's another glass on the catering table if you want to. I mean, you don't have to." He looked at the glass, looked at her. "I should probably get home," he said. "Piper's at the neighbor's, but she's—" "Of course." She nodded. "Yeah, of course." He didn't move, she didn't move either. 5 minutes, he said. "I don't have to be there until 9. They ended up on the mezzanine. It wasn't planned. The catering table was in the corridor off the lobby, and they'd both gotten wine." Tanner had looked at his work boots and the glass of red and thought that this was probably the most incongruous thing that had happened to him in years, and then Arden had said, "You want to see the mezzanine?" They finished the ceiling work this week, and he said sure, because it was his electrical up there and he hadn't seen the final result in context. The mezzanine was dark. She found the light switch, one of the dimmers his crew had installed, and brought it up to about 30%, which was exactly right. The original plaster ceiling had been repaired and painted, and the recessed lighting he'd spec'd sat flush in it, warm and even. Old brass wall sconces had been rewired and rehung. The room looked like what it had been trying to be for 80 years. "That's good work," he said, and he meant the whole room, but he was mostly looking at the light. "It is," she said. She was looking at it too. They stood there for a moment. Below them, somewhere, there was the sound of the event, low music, voices. Up here it was quiet. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked. "Electrical. Since I was 22. Apprenticed right out of high school, took a few years off, went back. Been running my own crew for 11 years. Do you like it?" He thought about it. People didn't ask him that often. "Yeah," he said. "I like figuring things out. I like that when you're done you can look at something and know it works because you made it work." She nodded slowly. "I like that too, about my job. The part where at the end, there's a building. The part before the end is less good. So much less good," she said, and laughed that short, surprised laugh. He looked at her sideways. There was something he'd been carrying around for weeks that he'd been careful not to look at directly, the way you don't look directly at something bright. He looked at it now, just for a second. "You grew up in Charlotte?" he asked. "Maryland, actually. Outside Baltimore. I've moved around a lot since then. You like that? Moving around?" She considered it. "I used to think I did." He waited to see if she'd say more. She didn't. Below them, the music changed to something slower. "My daughter decided she wants to be an electrician," he said. Not because it was relevant to anything, but because he wanted to say something that was true and easy. "She watched me fix a light switch last month and told me she was going to do that." Arden smiled. "How old is she?" 7. "What's her name?" "Piper." She turned to look at him. "That's a great name. She'd agree with you very strongly." He paused. "She's the reason I'm still in Beaufort. I keep getting offered bigger contracts in Columbia, Charleston. But she's got her school, her friends. It didn't feel right to pull her. That's a real thing to give up. It's not a sacrifice. She didn't ask me to. It mattered more to keep her life stable." Arden was quiet. He couldn't read her expression in the low light. Not exactly. "She's lucky," Arden said finally, "to have a dad who thinks about her like that." The words landed the way simple, true things sometimes did. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure. The night you walked in through the loading dock, you came in from outside with your heels off. Did you need some air or were you actually leaving?" She looked at him. "A beat. Leaving," she said. "I was going to my car. What changed your mind?" "I ran into you on the stairs." He held that. "Why were you leaving?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Because I've been to about 100 events like that, and the last couple of months, working on this project, have been the first time in a while that I've felt like the work was actually real. Like I was actually in a place, not just managing a place from the outside." She paused. "I didn't particularly want to go back into a room full of people who mostly see the building as a line on a spreadsheet." Tanner thought about that. About the difference between the people who showed up to his jobs and actually looked at the work, and the people who just looked at the schedule. "You're the first project lead I've worked with," he said slowly, "who came on site in shoes you could actually walk in." She looked at him. "That's a very low bar. It's the bar I had." Something moved across her face, something soft and a little wry. "Tanner, yeah. I'm going back to Charlotte when project wraps. You know that." "Ah, I know that. So I don't know what I'm—" She stopped. "You don't have to know," he said. "I'm not asking you to know anything." She looked at the ceiling, at the lights his crew had put up there. Then she looked back at him. "I've thought about you," she said, "outside of work. I want to say that clearly in case it wasn't obvious, which I know it probably wasn't because I'm good at not being obvious." He looked at her. "It was obvious," he said quietly. "Was it?" "No," he admitted, "not at all. I just didn't want you to think I hadn't noticed." She laughed. He did too. It broke something open between them, some formality they'd been maintaining for 11 weeks on a professional job site. Standing in the finished mezzanine of a restored hotel, him in work boots and her in bare feet with a glass of red wine. "My daughter," he said, "is the most important thing I have. My crew is my livelihood. My life is in Beaufort." He paused. "I'm not asking you to want any of that. I know it's not simple." "No," she said. "It's not simple, but I'd like to take you to dinner," he said. Before the project's over, one dinner. Not as a contractor and a project lead, just as people. She looked at him for a long time. One dinner, she said. One dinner. And then we figure out the rest, and then we figure out the rest. She picked up her wineglass from the narrow ledge where she'd set it. He picked up his. They stood in the warm, low light of the room his crew had wired, in a building that was almost finished, in a city that was hers for a few more weeks. And they were quiet for a moment in the way of people who have said the most important things and don't need to fill the space after. I should check on Piper, he said eventually. I should go back to the event. Dalla. 5 more minutes, they both said, at the same time. They looked at each other. And then they laughed again, and it was easier than it had been, and the music drifted up from below, and outside the old windows of the Whitmore Hotel, Beaufort was doing what it always did on November nights. Settling into the dark, the harbor quiet, the lights on the water. The dinner happened on a Tuesday. Not a fancy dinner he'd offered, and she'd said she'd rather somewhere real, which had surprised him and also not surprised him at all. He took her to a barbecue place on Carteret Street that had been there since before he was born, with paper napkins and a chalk menu board and the best brisket in the county. She ate the brisket. She ate most of his coleslaw. She told him about growing up in Maryland with 3 brothers and a mother who worked double shifts at a hospital and a father who had left when she was 9, and she told it plainly, without performing the pain of it or minimizing it either. He told her about Piper's mother, not the whole story, just the shape of it and what came after. She listened the way she listened to everything on sight, fully with her eyes on him. Do you ever think about what comes next? She asked. For you, not work. Yeah, he said. More than I used to. What does it look like? He thought about it honestly. Someone who wants to stay. That's it. That's the whole list. He paused. I've stopped making it complicated. She was quiet. She turned her wineglass on the table. I've been thinking about Charlotte, she said. About whether I want to keep doing what I've been doing. Moving project to project. I'm good at it. I've been good at it for a long time. She looked up. But I'm not sure good at it is the same as right for me anymore. Tanner looked at her across the table in the warm light of the restaurant, and he thought about what it meant to build something versus what it meant to live in it. About all the jobs he'd done where he wired a building and walked away and never saw what it became, and the ones he drove past sometimes, years later, and saw the lights on. You don't have to decide anything tonight, he said. I know, she said, but I wanted to say it out loud, to someone who'd actually hear it. He heard it. They stayed until the restaurant started putting chairs up around them, and neither of them particularly noticed. The project wrapped in early December. The Whitmore Hotel reopened with a small ceremony that Tanner read about in the local paper. He'd driven past it a few times since handover, the warm glow of the lobby, the sconces in the upstairs windows doing exactly what they were supposed to do. Good work. His crew's work. Arden had gone back to Charlotte. She'd texted him the morning after the Tuesday dinner. I meant what I said about thinking about it. Give me a little time. He'd written back, take what you need. Meant it. He went back to his life. Piper, the crew, the coleslaw rotation at the barbecue place, a new contract for a commercial kitchen renovation in Port Royal. Gerald the rubber duck, fully functional and stationed permanently on the edge of the bathroom sink. The morning coffee ritual, minus the rubber duck drowning incidents. 3 weeks after the project closed, on a Thursday evening, his phone rang. I want to come back, Arden said, to Beaufort. Not for the hotel. He was standing in the kitchen. Piper was doing homework at the table behind him, humming something under her breath. Okay, he said. I don't know exactly what that looks like. I'm still figuring it out. I might consult remotely for a while. I have some conversations to have in Charlotte first. Okay, you're very calm about this. I'm not calm, he said. I've been not calm about this for 3 weeks. I believe you when you say something. A pause on her end. That's because of you, she said quietly. The project. Watching you. You always said what you meant and did what you said. Another pause. I want to be around someone like that. He looked out the kitchen window at the dark yard, the back neighbor's porch light on, the November stars doing their thing above the South Carolina low country. Behind him, Piper said, without looking up from her homework, Daddy, who are you talking to? A friend, he said. Piper considered this. Is she the one who asked about my wrist? He turned around slowly and looked at his daughter. What? Dale told me, she said, with the absolute serenity of a child who has excellent sources. He said the project lady asked about my wrist when I heard it. I thought that was nice. Tanner looked at his daughter for a long moment. She's on the phone, he said. Piper's eyes went wide. Right now? He held the phone out. Piper took it with her good hand, the left one, the wrist long since healed, and held it to her ear with the gravity of someone conducting important business. Hi, she said. This is Piper. Thank you for asking about my wrist. It's all better. I scored at the Heartfelt game. A pause. Yes, okay, I'll give him back now. She handed the phone to Tanner with a nod of satisfaction and went back to her homework. He put the phone to his ear. Arden was laughing on the other end, that same surprised real laugh, the one that had been catching him off guard for months. She scored, Arden said. She scored, he confirmed. I'll be in Beaufort on Friday, Arden said. If that works. He looked at his daughter, gap-toothed, homework-focused, utterly unbothered, and at the rubber duck on the dish rack and the coffee mug on the counter and the small specific life he'd built in this house, in this town, for the two of them. Friday works, he said.